Hi, everybody. Tim here. This week's Rewind episode is on Kevin Colbert's drafts. And we originally recorded this episode back in 2022 when Colbert retired. So you'll hear us at the end talk about some of his final draft picks, which we were kind of saying, well, it hasn't, jury's still out on these ones, although we were probably a little pessimistic. And as it turns out, those last couple of years weren't so good. But still an interesting journey through all the years that Kevin Colbert was the Steelers GM. You'll definitely see a through line here, and you might even see a little bit of history repeating itself with Omar Khan. So enjoy this week's Rewind episode on Kevin Colbert's drafts. So Kevin Colbert was the general manager of the Steelers for a long time. He oversaw 23 drafts for the Steelers and made a total of 183 draft picks. We're going to spend this time briefly going through each of those drafts. And because there are 183 picks, we're obviously not going to talk about every single guy that he picked. We're really going to focus only on the day one and day two picks from each of those drafts, aka the first three rounds. Because really, in NFL drafts, those are really the only rounds that matter. And then if you get kind of lucky later, then good for you. But we won't mention any names of relevance drafted in later rounds.
James Conner would beg to differ, since I think he was a third round pick. I guess we'll find out.
You will find out. So with that, let's jump right in. So Kevin Colbert is hired in the offseason in 2000, right before the 2000 draft. And we did a whole episode detailing kind of the context behind when Tom Donahoe was fired and why Kevin Colbert was brought in. You can go back and listen to that episode for some of that background. But his first draft, the Steelers actually have the number 8 overall pick. And oddly enough, Steve, it's the highest draft pick that Kevin Colbert will get to make in his career as Steelers GM. So his very first pick is the highest pick he'll ever get to make. He'll never get to pick that high again. And going into that draft, tell me if this sounds like a familiar story. Going into that draft, the Steelers needed a quarterback, and there was a lot of buzz around which quarterback will they select, or will they select a different position? And the quarterback that everybody had in mind was Chad Pennington from Marshall. The Steelers go a different route. They select wide receiver Plexico Burress from Michigan State in the first round. Plex definitely had his moments with the Steelers. I would argue he probably didn't live up to that number 8 overall pick. In the second round, they select Marvell Smith. Smith was a member of both Super Bowl teams, although he was injured for the second Super Bowl. And he did make a Pro Bowl in 2004. And then the third round, they had 2 picks. They took Kedrick Clancy, a defensive tackle, and Hank Poteet, a defensive back out of Pitt. Both those guys did not amount to much. And in the later rounds, the 5th round, they got Clark Hagans, who was a starter at outside linebacker for several years. So that ended up being a pretty good pick. And then they had a second 5th round pick where they famously selected quarterback T. Martin out of Tennessee. And why that was kind of famous now is because they passed on Michigan quarterback Tom Brady instead. So that was the 2000 draft. Steve, comments?
They didn't. T. Martin is the not Peyton Manning or Tom Brady, unfortunately, for T. Martin. Although he's a pretty good offensive coordinator from what I hear in college. So it all worked out for T. Martin. Kendrick Clancy was not good. Hank Poteet was not as big as a bust as I think you make him out to be. But, I mean, it's a third round. I mean, it's not, you're not going to draft normally a Hall of Famer there, but he did play for New England for several years, and he was a pretty decent punt returner for the Steelers. But as a defensive back for the Steelers, he was not that great. But
yeah, I probably remember him as more of a bust because I was a huge fan of his at Pitt. He went to Pitt and thought he was really good, thought he had the potential to be like another Rod Woodson, and I was sorely mistaken.
No, definitely nowhere near Rod Woodson. Maybe like maybe Deshae Townsend. I don't know. Maybe not quite even that.
As a ceiling, yes, but he definitely did not ever live up to that, unfortunately.
Yeah. And don't be too mad about the T Martin, because a lot of San Francisco. Who did San Francisco draft in this? Like somebody awfully horrible out of Hofstra over Tom Brady in the first round. It's a joke who they drafted. So
Yeah,
and
T. Martin had won a national championship at Tennessee after Peyton Manning had left. So it wasn't like T. Martin did nothing in college, but it
I
was
don't understand the guy from Hofstra. Like, what did you see? Like, this guy wasn't exactly Steve McNair. I mean, I don't know. He did nothing too. Like they started Tim Rattay out of Louisiana Tech over him. I don't know why I know so much about that guy, but just because I guess because it's like the Tom Brady. Like San Francisco really set their organization back for years, not drafting Tom Brady. But
right. Well, I mean, you could make the same, I guess, not that we set ourselves back years, but certainly things might have turned out differently. But that's the draft for you. Giovanni Carmisi is the guy you're
that's
thinking of.
him. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He has like a very Italian. Like, yeah, we're doing
Yeah.
Giovanni Carmisi. Yeah. I'm gonna not throw the bally.
So that was Colbert's first draft. His second draft in 2001, the first round pick, they take a nose tackle out of Texas, a guy named Casey Hampton. Hampton ends up being a 5-time Pro Bowler. He's later named to the Steelers all-time team. He's a borderline Hall of Famer, I would say. So that was a pretty good pick. And then in the second round, the Steelers select Kendrell Bell, a linebacker, who, that was another like gangbuster pick because Bell ended up being the defensive rookie of the year that year. But injuries really limited how long he was good. He's really only good for about a year and change, and then he just never really did anything again in the NFL. So really good pick for a very, very short amount of time. One thing of note in this draft, and they didn't have a third round pick, and there's nobody of note later. One thing of note in this draft, they traded down for Hampton, and they traded up for Bell, and their third round pick was actually forfeited. That's why they didn't have a third round pick. The NFL took it away. And there's an interesting story behind that, but I'll save that for a different episode.
Kobe played special teams for a little while, didn't he? Or was he always like a backup? I vaguely remember that guy.
He was a center. He was the fifth round pick that year.
Yeah,
he was.
I vaguely remember him playing here and there. But Casey Hampton is way better than all the other people that like get worshipped at nose tackle, and I'll take that to the mattresses for Mr. Hampton there, because like he was definitely way better than Ted Washington or Albert Hainsworth or I name like who is Vince Wilfork. Vince Wilfork wishes he was Casey Hampton. I mean, he was way better than any of those guys, and he's probably not going to make the Hall of Fame because there's too many Steelers. So whatever.
Yeah, I think there's a good argument for him to be there. Of course, we're a little biased, but definitely a really good draft. So at this point, Colbert's starting to, because I think the 2000 draft he just came in, right? So the 2001 draft is probably his first one he can really put his stamp on. He follows that up in 2002 with the first round pick is Kendall Simmons, a guard who, the solid player, had a lot of injuries that kind of limited him. He was a starter on the Super Bowl 40 team, and that was a really good offensive line. And then in the second round, they take Antoine Randall L., who was a quarterback in college, but the Steelers drafted him as a wide receiver. And Randall L. was always an okay wide receiver, but the other stuff he did, trick plays and things like that, end up being huge later on for the Steelers. And then in the third round, they take a safety, Chris Hope, who is also a solid starter for several years and is also a starter on that Super Bowl 40 team. And then for the later round picks, they strike gold in the later round too. The fourth round, they take Larry Foote. He starts on both Super Bowl teams at linebacker. And then way down at the very end of the draft, pick number 242, they take Brett Kiesel, the Beard, out of BYU. So you can already see, even in his first three drafts, Colbert's really laying the foundation of that team that's going to go on and make it to 3 Super Bowls.
How many draft picks do they have total? Like 8? Is there 8? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And 4 or 5 of those guys ended up being like really solid players, if not really good. Like I think you're underrating Randall a little bit. He was a really good wide receiver. Like the slot, he wasn't a like outside, but in that slot role he played, he was really good. Then, like you said, when you could add in the trick plays, that I don't know. I thought he was better than average. Like, I mean, maybe top 10 at slot receiver if there is such a ranking. I mean, he was at least as good as Brandon Stokely or any of those people that played for the Patriots as slot wide receiver. I don't know. Chris Hope was solid. He was like a good player. I think the guy they're going to get later is better than him, but he was good. And Larry Foote ended up playing well. And I thought Kendall Simmons was a solid pick. So that was a pretty good draft. I mean, LeVar Glover didn't work out, but hey, they're not all home runs here, right?
Well, and two things to note. Number one, the Steelers in the year before had made it to the AFC Championship game. So Kendall Simmons was pick
That's
number 30.
That's a low pick.
Yeah. Pick number 30, and Randall was pick number 62. And then the second thing is Randall, in addition to playing wide receiver and all the trick plays, was also a pretty effective kick returner too. So don't want to leave that out.
Yeah, he returned a punt for a touchdown, I think.
At least once or twice. I remember the Detroit game in 2005, him doing that. I don't have it in front of me how many, but that even just getting field position, even if he didn't return all the way, he was pretty effective in that role too. 2003 is definitely a year that stands out because in the first round, the Steelers trade up, and as a result, they don't actually have a lot of picks in this draft. They only have 5 picks in the draft, but they make a gamble. They trade up, and boy, does it pay off, because they make a trade to get a defensive back out of USC named Troy Polamalu, and boy, do the Steelers go on to have those great defenses without Troy Polamalu? It's hard to foresee that happening. That might be. Probably the guy picked the year after is the most important pick of Colbert's career, but you could definitely make an argument that Troy is number 2 on that list. The second round, however, is the complete opposite. They select Alonzo Jackson, a linebacker from Florida State, and boy, is he just the worst. So it's funny. In the first round, you might have probably a top 3 all-time pick for Colbert, and then the second round, you probably have a bottom 3 all-time pick for Colbert and Alonzo Jackson. There's no third round pick. And then the fourth round, they take Ike Taylor, who, is really the team's best cornerback for the next decade. So that ends up being a huge pick as well. And then, like I said, they only have 5 picks. The next 2 picks don't really do anything. But Brian St. Pierre is in that draft. And he ends up being impersonated very famously by a fan who wanted to pick up girls and thought, well, nobody's going to believe I'm Ben Roethlisberger or Tommy Maddox, but if I say I'm Brian St. Pierre, they probably won't know who that is. They might recognize the name, but not the face. So that was a very famous story. The guy pretended to go around being Brian St. Pierre to pick up women.
Obviously before smartphones and you could easily disprove this fact.
Right.
Yeah. But it was an interesting, I give him A for cunning and effort. I will say that it's if you figure in these 2 drafts, 2000, they basically rebuilt their whole defensive secondary. And all 3 of those guys ended up working out, and they won a Super Bowl with all 3 of them. So I mean, that's really good in 2 drafts to basically totally because that was the weakest. Remember, we've said that so many times over the course of our podcast, how weak our pass defense was, and he basically rebuilt it in 2 seasons. So,
yeah, that's a great point. We did an episode about the 2002 team that was led by Tommy Maddox, and that team just got shredded through the air, absolutely shredded. There were so many games that the Steelers had to win that year, 37-34 or something like that, because they just couldn't stop teams from passing. And you're right, I didn't even think about that. 3 of the 4 defensive back starters on the Super Bowl team in 2005 of a good secondary all came in these 2 drafts.
And then there's going to be another one coming up in another year or two. That's going to be the final piece, kind of. Well, they still have Deshae Townsend, which was not a Colbert draft pick.
Yeah, that was pre-Colbert.
Yeah.
Well, the 2004 draft, hey, we actually just did an episode on the 2004 draft. And the first guy picked, quarterback out of Miami, Ohio, Ben Roethlisberger. Guess he was okay. Obviously, that was, like I said, I think that has to stick out as the most important pick of the Colbert era, the best pick of the Colbert era. It's the Steelers just aren't the Steelers without Ben. They don't win 2 Super Bowls without Ben.
I know Alonzo Jackson. I mean, come on.
They don't do any of this without Ben. So that's huge. And just like the previous year, the second round is a stark contrast because they select a defensive back from Tuscaloosa named Ricardo Coakley. And, he
was bad. He was really bad.
Yeah, the thing I remember about Coakley, so first of all, the Steelers trade up with the Colts to get him. And the guy that the Colts drafted with the Steelers' original pick, Steve, it's Bob Sanders, who's a future NFL Defensive Player of the Year.
They already had both their safeties, so I guess.
I guess, but I mean,
you can't have Bob Sanders and Troy Polamalu in the same back. It's just not going to work. You know what I mean?
Fair. It's just that's who they picked. Like, we traded up, and they traded down to take Bob Sanders. We traded up to take Ricardo Coakley. And this guy, the thing I remember the most about him was, so number one, he wasn't very good defensive back. But in 2006, 2 years after this, Cowher just insisted on using him as a punt returner. And I could never understand why. He was not a good punt returner. And they're playing the Bengals at home, and they're winning. And Coakley tries to field a punt deep in his own territory in the fourth quarter, and he bobbles it, and he tries to pick it up and run, and then he fumbles it a second time, and the Bengals recover and they score, and that's the end of the game. So that was just, to me, that summarized that guy's whole career in that one play. The third round, the Steelers select Max Starks from Florida, another guy that's a really solid presence on the offensive line for years to come. And then nobody really of note in the later rounds.
Seriously, whoa, ouch. Yeah, those later rounds, they got 2 people out of that draft.
They did, but the guy they got in the first round, I mean, you could have got one person and it wouldn't have mattered because they got the guy they got in the first.
Yep.
2005, another year where they have a low pick because they had made the AFC Championship game the year before. And with the 30th pick overall, they draft Heath Miller, the tight end from Virginia. Heath is obviously another great pick, becomes just a fixture in the offense for years to come. The second round, they take Bryant McFadden, who is a defensive back, another really good. I don't know if that's the guy you're referring to, Steve. Is
yes. That was it.
Puzzle. Yep.
And it's weird. They just keep like every draft you've done so far, like in the first or second round, in the second round, they've drafted all defensive backs. They just keep going. Like, you see, like it was Poteet, then it was, what's his name? Paul Malo, and then, it's just, then Coakley, and they just kept like, okay, and Chris Hope. It's just like they kept drafting defensive backs, and it finally paid off here. Like, they finally had the missing piece. Ike Taylor, Brian McFadden, Chris Hope, and then Deshae Townsend was, pretty solid too when they moved him like as that third or fourth defensive back. So it worked out. Yeah,
it did. Third round is Trey Essex, a tackle. He was a fairly good utility guy who kind of filled in whenever there was injuries. And then in the later rounds, nobody really of note again. Chris Kiyomatu, the 6th round pick, guard, did eventually become a starter. Although I'll never really be quite sure why. He's the guy that got the holding penalty on the final drive of Super Bowl 43 to start the drive off.
I thought he was on that offensive line, which that was terrible. That was a terrible offensive line. Outside of Max Starks, who was okay, good. I mean, but
So 2005, that's also the year that the Steelers win their um, fifth Super Bowl. And again, you can see from these drafts the years before how this all sort of came together, turned them from a very mediocre team, actually a bad team in the late 90s, to a contender to an eventual Super Bowl champion. So already by this point, I think Colbert's really building a legacy. 2006, he follows that up. The first round pick is Santonio Holmes, the wide receiver from Ohio State. That's obviously a huge pick. Holmes does not have a real long career as a Steeler, but I will argue to this day that there's no way we win that second Super Bowl without Santonio Holmes. I mean, it wasn't just him making that catch in the end zone either. It was that whole season and postseason. He caught the pass to beat the Ravens in Baltimore that gave us the division. He crushed San Diego in the playoffs. He was huge in the AFC Championship game. I mean, he just led the way that year. So Santonio Holmes was just a huge pick. There's no second round pick in 2006. They have two third round picks who are both bad. Anthony Smith, a defensive back, whose most famous moment was trash talking the Patriots and Tom Brady the week before they played them, the year they were undefeated. And when Tom Brady smoked him very easily in the end zone, Brady even went up and said something to him. I can't even imagine what that was. And then Willie Reed, a wide receiver from Florida State, who was supposed to be a good kick returner, but wasn't. So those weren't really good picks. Later rounds, fourth round, they got Willie Colon, who's an offensive lineman who, for a fourth round pick, he lasted a while. He started a lot of games. He was average, not bad for a fourth round pick, a guy that they were able to plug in and be useful.
It's crazy. Like out of these drafts, you look at them and there's like maybe one or two good player. Like Anthony Smith, like I remember I saw him play in college and he was okay, but I never thought he was anything special. But yeah, that's another like the first pick was good. I guess like it seems like the way it goes in these drafts, if you get like one good pick, you're doing pretty well.
It depends how good that pick is too, right? Like
Yeah.
you just had how many years in a row of Casey Hampton, Troy Polamalu, Ben Roethlisberger, Heath Miller, Santonio Holmes. I mean, these are
Yeah.
these aren't just guys like Chris Hope, like you mentioned Chris Hope. I mean, that guy was a very solid safety, good starter, right? But if you had all Chris Hopes, you wouldn't have won two Super Bowls, right?
Right. Right. And it's just kind of weird. There is like look, they drafted another defensive back. How many defensive backs do they do?
Yeah, the thing with defensive backs, that'll be a trend, especially when we get into like the 2010s, because they're trying to sort of do the same thing then as rebuild that defensive backfield. 2007 is an interesting year because that is Mike Tomlin's first year as Steeler head coach. So Bill Cowher has retired at this point, and Mike Tomlin is hired, and really his first initiation into being the Steelers coach is, having input on this 2007 draft. And this is another pretty good draft. The first round, they take Lawrence Timmons, linebacker from Florida State. He's a starter and inside linebacker for literally the next decade, and a pretty good one too. I think Lawrence Timmons is one of the more underrated players in Steeler history. He'll never go down as an all-time great or a Ring of Honor kind of guy, probably, but he was very, very good for a long period of time. And then in the second round, kind of the opposite, another guy that was really good, but probably better than Timmons, but for a much shorter period of time, was Lamar Woodley, who was an outside linebacker, a really good pass rusher. And again, his greatness was a little short-lived, but boy, in his years where he was really good, he was dominant.
Yeah, that defense. When you had him and Harrison, I don't know. You could argue that all day. I think we have, so.
Absolutely. The third round, Matt Spaeth, the tight end, did not really do all that much. And then for later rounds, the fourth round, the Steelers actually draft a punter from Baylor named Daniel Sepulveda. And I remember that, Steve, that was very controversial at the time. What are you doing taking a punter in the fourth round, you jagoffs? I mean, people were really, really fired up about that pick. And the argument at the time was, well, a punter can really change field position. If you have a guy that is a solid punter for, the next amount of years, then that could really be a weapon. Unfortunately, Sepulveda doesn't prove all the doubters wrong because he's often hurt and does not really amount to much.
He was a good punter. He just got hurt. I just remember he always seemed like he was hurt. But like when he punted, he wasn't bad. He was good. But like you said, like it's not like a field goal kicker. Like a field goal kicker can like win you games. Like that Tucker for Baltimore. Like when you play defense against Baltimore at the end of the game, if they get inside the 50, it's like there's a good chance he's going to make that kick. So, but a punter, I don't know. I don't think a punter has. Not that like you look at the other people at the back. Well, I don't want to steal Willie Gay, in the 5th round. That ended up being a good pick, but most 9 times out of 10, there really aren't that many like impactful players. And I can't. That's like we're not even halfway through, and I can't even believe like how little. Like there's like all these players just at the back half of the draft, and we're not even doing all of them, really, right? There's just so many people that just did nothing. It's like it's kind of crazy.
That's the NFL draft. There's 7 rounds, and there used to be more. There used to be even as recently as the 80s, I think there were like 12 rounds. So that the NFL drafts were just littered with late round guys that never did anything. Like you said, the 5th round, William Gay, that ends up being a good pick because Big Play Willie Gay is around for a long time. And as we detailed in our Fun Facts episode, is tied for the Steeler record for most pick sixes in Steeler history. So whenever that guy made plays, he made big plays.
Is that him and Rod Woodson? It has to be him.
It is, yeah. He's tied with Rod Woodson.
That's the only time you ever say their names in the same that, or you say who are Steelers. That's about the only time you say Willie Gay and Rod Woodson in the same sentence.
I always like that trivia question because it's a really hard one. You would, because you would want to answer like, I don't know, Donnie Shell, Mel Blount,
yeah.
Troy. It has to be somebody like that. Parnell Lake. It's Big Play Willie Gay. So up to this point, really, Colbert is making a lot of really good picks. Again, the Steelers are a dominant team during this era. I think, though, starting with this next draft, 2008, this is where things start to go a little bit south. And if you want to, drafts take a few years to pan out, right? So if you want to look a few years ahead to like that 2012, 2013 kind of mediocrity time that they had, I think these drafts are where you start. And it's funny because the Steelers have 2 eras where they made multiple Super Bowls, right? They have the 70s where they made 4 Super Bowls, and then they have the 2000s where they made 3 Super Bowls. And if you look at the 1970s and you look at the drafts at the end of that decade and then into the start of the early 1980s, even when they were still winning Super Bowls, they're not drafting guys to replace the aging stars. And at this point in 2008, history starts to repeat itself. So the first round pick that year is a running back from Illinois, Rashard Mendenhall. And we've talked about Mendenhall before. It's tough. His career is a little tough because he's so easy to get mad at. There was a recent thing that came out where he said that the fumble in the Super Bowl wasn't his fault. And there was a thing way back when where he defended like Osama bin Laden. He just was an easy guy to dislike in general, but he also really never really lived up to that promise of a first round pick. He had moments. He definitely had his moments, but he was not that stalwart running back that the Steelers drafted him to be. And then in the second round, they take a wide receiver named Limas Sweed, who was supposed to be this tall receiver. That was a big thing then. You had guys like Calvin Johnson and people like that, Randy Moss, these guys that could just get position and you could just throw the ball up deep and didn't matter if they recovered, they could still make the catch. Well, Limas wasn't one of those guys, even though that's what he was projected to be. In fact, his most memorable moment was dropping a pass where he was wide open in the AFC Championship game that year and then pretending to be hurt afterwards. And then in the third round, they draft Bruce Davis, a linebacker, and there's no record of him ever actually playing in a game in the NFL.
I remember him being drafted. Wow. He was a third round pick. I mean, wow, those third round picks, huh? Even Dennis Dixon and Ryan Monday, who were drafted later, had much better careers in the NFL than Bruce Davis.
Or Lima Swede.
Yeah. I mean, I think Dixon ended up starting somewhere else after he started here, didn't he?
Yeah, he started here because Ben was suspended and Charlie Batch was hurt. So, I mean,
Yeah.
starting, I would put in air quotes, but, you know, uh, just again, like I said, this is really the first draft that you can look at and not pick out like wow, what a great, you said it before,
Yeah.
Steve, like one or two really good picks. And this is really the first draft where you're like, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
That continues into the next year, 2009. The first round pick, yeah.
Well, maybe not as bad as you think. Yeah.
So let's go through it. The first round pick is Ziggy Hood, the defensive end. And now, granted, this is again a year after they won the Super Bowl, so this was the 32nd pick. So keep that in mind. Colbert is always drafting low in these drafts because the Steelers are always contenders. So that's not an easy pick when you're drafting all the way down to 32. But Ziggy Hood was a huge bust. There's no second round pick, but the Steelers have 3 third round picks. The first pick in that third round is Craig Urbick, a tackle who never plays in the NFL. The second pick is Mike Wallace, a wide receiver who, another guy that for a time really had some stardom. He was a great deep threat, really fast, but didn't last all that long. And then Keenan Lewis was a defensive back who I always thought was really good, and who the Steelers gave up way too early on, and ended up being pretty decent for New Orleans. So some, and then nobody really of note in the later rounds. So some not a complete bust of a draft, but Keenan Lewis didn't work out for us, and Mike Wallace, it was pretty short lived, and then he wanted all this money, and he really wasn't worth it, and he proved that when he went elsewhere. So again, not a great draft here either.
I think Mike Wallace is a solid pick, and that's what, in the third round. And I mean, he was really fast, but he never really developed completely, at least with the Steelers, to like where you thought he could be, He just was, like you said, just kind of always a really fast guy, and he never developed the rest of his like game beyond like go that way as fast as you can,
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. So again, some of these drafts now starting to peter out a little bit, and you can see why a few years after this, they're not that competitive anymore. 2010, things pick up in the first round again. They take Marquise Pouncey, a center from Florida. Pouncey is a 9-time Pro Bowler. He is almost, I don't know, Steve, probably going to be in the Hall of Fame, I would think.
I guess. I'm sure.
I mean, he's definitely in the conversation, right?
How many centers can the Steelers have in the Hall of Fame? I guess it's going to be 3 here.
It probably should be.
Yeah.
So that's a really good pick. The second round, not so much. It's Jason Rawls, the linebacker from Virginia Tech. He's a bust, and he retires very suddenly at the age of 27 for reasons that are still unknown. Some people thought it was because he was a Jehovah's Witness and wanted to get more deeply involved with his faith there. But he never really explains why he just sort of up and retires. Third round is Emmanuel Sanders, a wide receiver who's ends up being a really solid wide receiver who I believe is still in the league today. At least he was this previous season for Buffalo. So he actually has a really long career. Again, sort of similar to Wallace. Only a few of those years are with the Steelers. But that was a pretty good pick in the third round. And then later on in the draft, this is another probably top 3 pick for Colbert, especially because it doesn't come until the 6th round. It's Antonio Brown, who ends up becoming the best wide receiver in the history of the team. and the Steelers get him at pick number 195 in the sixth round. So after two kind of down drafts, I think Colbert really starts to rebuild at this point.
Yeah, well, the reason I think they kind of took a flyer on Brown there because like he was such like I think the reason he fell to the sixth round that all the off the field stuff. He got kicked out of a couple schools before he ended up at Central Michigan,
Correct.
didn't he? Yeah, so but they like a sixth round pick. It's like, well, take a chance. Maybe he works out. Maybe he doesn't. You've seen, you ain't really losing much. So, hey, yeah, that is a good draft. And Pouncey, Sanders, and Brown, that's solid. I mean, not too much else going on in there, but
some guys that would definitely pick up the slack for some of those stars from the previous decade getting older.
I do remember Stevenson Sylvester for some reason. I remember that name. I don't know if he played any, but the sixth round pick out of Utah, or no, fifth round pick out of Utah. So
yeah, good on you. I do not remember him. The 2011 draft, the first round pick that year. So this is another year where they're coming off of a Super Bowl. So they have the number 31 overall pick because they had lost that Super Bowl. And they take Cam Hayward, defensive end from Ohio State. And I don't know, Steve, is it safe to call him an all-time great Steeler at this point? I think it is.
I never know I don't know. Like, he's definitely good. And I think he's like Steeler, like he's definitely going to be one of the better players, like Steeler Ring of Honor, but Hall of Fame, I don't know.
I don't think Hall of Fame. I said all-time great Steeler. So like Ring of Honor, yes. Hall of Fame, I doubt it.
I'd never there's been some times when they were so bad against the run with him in their defense, like him making tackles 5 yards down the field. It's like, okay, I'm glad you made that tackle, but that's not really what you're supposed to be doing. And he's a good player. Maybe just the people around him haven't been that great. And it's, tough to play defensive line by yourself. We're not all Aaron Donald, I guess.
Fair. The second round, they take a tackle, Marcus Gilbert. He's pretty good. He's actually a starter for much of the 2010s, so that's a pretty solid pick. Third round is Curtis Brown, a defensive back who only plays in 7 games. And then the rest of the draft is not really anything to speak of. So, again, starting to get some decent players, not quite the drafts he was having in the early 2000s, but starting to get some decent players after those bad drafts in the late 2000s. 2012 is another really solid first round pick. It's David DeCastro, guard from Stanford. He ends up being a 6-time Pro Bowler, and you could probably make an argument that he's the best guard in the history of the team, other than Alan Faneca. I think you could easily make that argument. So DeCastro ends up being a huge pick and really solidifies the offensive line, especially when you paired him next to the Pouncey pick from 2 years earlier. One guy that does not help solidify the offensive line, a second-round pick, Mike Adams. He was a tackle. He's a bust. His most famous moment came in a game that the Steelers were playing in London against the Minnesota Vikings, where Jared Allen of the Vikings just destroyed him, made 3 sacks, was all over Roethlisberger because Adams could not block. And then the third round was another bust who was always hurt, a linebacker named Sean Spence. Some other notable picks in this draft. In the 5th round, the Steelers select Chris Rainey, who was like a sort of a scat back guy that they drafted to return kicks, but he never really returned kicks. And then in the 7th round, and that'll be a trend, by the way, that won't be the last time they do that and fail. And then in the 7th round, they select Kelvin Beachum, who's a tackle, who, for being the 7th round pick, number 248 overall, he ends up being a starter for a while. And in 2014, Pro Football Focus, who ranks the offensive lineman, actually rated Kelvin Beachum as the 5th best tackle in football that year. So for the 7th round, number 248 overall pick, that was a pretty good pick.
Yeah, I don't know. De Castro was good. He can starting to thin out a little, huh? Here. Yeah. And and Calvin, once again, like you see like every couple drafts, like there'll be some like guy jump out of the woodwork like in the lower. Although that's kind of two in a row, like the Antonio Brown and then Calvin Beachum. Yeah, there's kind of like two guys that kind of jump out, but they haven't replaced, the other people either. You know,
I mean,
like
there's probably a reason why the Steelers made three Super Bowls and two AFC Championship games in those first 10 years, right?
yeah.
And in the
Yeah.
second 10 years, they made one AFC Championship game and zero Super Bowls. And you can kind of start seeing it with these drafts. 2013, oh boy, the first round pick is a huge bust. Jarvis Jones, remember Jarvis, linebacker from Georgia,
Not at all. Not even a little bit, I don't think. Yeah.
was not good. Uh, but the second round pick was Le'Veon Bell.
He was really good. Yeah.
Yeah, and Le'Veon Bell, one of the probably, I mean, really, if you're talking about the top three running backs in Steeler history, I think, Franco, Jerome, and probably Le'Veon Bell is third. I mean, you could maybe put Willie Parker in there, or John Henry Johnson or some other guys, but Le'Veon Bell would definitely be up for that spot. So Le'Veon Bell, despite his character flaws and holdouts and rap career and everything else, boxing career that he has now, he was a very, very productive running back for the Steelers. And then in the third round, they take a wide receiver, Marcus Wheaton, who was, I don't know, he was serviceable for a third round pick. And then for the later rounds, the sixth round, they get Vince Williams, who becomes a starter at inside linebacker for a while. So that was another pretty good late round find with Vince Williams.
Yeah, yeah. Marcus Wheaton. I don't even remember Marcus Wheaton. I don't remember Jarvis Jones either. Did he ever play? I mean,
He did. I mean, he just never really lived up to the potential that they had for him. Yeah, and Wheaton, I mean, Wheaton was just, he was a wide receiver that caught some passes. Wasn't great, wasn't terrible. He was serviceable. They could use him. 2014. So they had taken
wow.
Jarvis Jones the year before. They were, I think, one of the big things during this time frame was trying to rebuild the linebacker unit because you said, Steve, they had James Harrison, they had Lamar Woodley on the outside. Then Lawrence Timmons was a starter inside for so many years. Larry Foote, James Farrior. I mean, the linebacking unit was so responsible for that defense's success. And by this point, they're really trying to build that back up. So they had taken Jones in 2013, and then they turn around the next year and take another linebacker in the first round, Ryan Shazier, at pick number 15 overall. And Shazier was a really, really good player. I mean, he could just cover the whole field. He was so he had great speed, he had great tackling ability, he had great awareness. I It's a shame. We all know what happened to him. His career was tragically cut short in that game in Cincinnati where he sustained the spinal cord injury. But for a while, that looked like a pick that was going to really solidify the defense for the next generation. And when he got hurt, it really just it took the defense really years to recover from that, Steve.
Oh, sure, for sure. I mean, this is kind of like when I look at this draft overall. I know we haven't gone through the rest of the people. This is like the what could have been draft because like these guys were so close to like rebuilding here. This is really close to like if all these guys even like just work out, like oh, they'd have been really good.
Yeah, and I think the guy that you're so let's go through the other picks. So the second round, Stephon Tuitt, who another guy that's pretty good, has a really good season, a really good couple of seasons later on, but his career ends prematurely as well. Dree Archer was the third round pick. That was another guy like Chris Rainey a couple years before that was this like scat back guy and kick return guy that doesn't pan out. So I think that was kind of the end of that experiment of them continuing to do that. And then in the fourth round, very similar to Shazier, Steve, Martavius Bryant, who really could have been a legend. I mean, that guy was so talented when he was on. He was so talented, wide receiver, and he ran into all kinds of substance abuse problems. And unfortunately, his career is cut short as well. So you're spot on there with the like what could have been draft.
Yeah, it's crazy because like they had a really good like those couple years there. They had Brown, they had Bryant, and then you had Bell coming out of the backfield, and they had they had two or three really good wide receivers and a running back to catch the ball. Like that offense was really good for a couple years. And Tuitt, I just don't like Tuitt seems to be up and down. Like everybody's like, oh, how good is he? How good is he? And it's like I watch him like sometimes he looks good, and then other times he just it's like he's not doing anything. I don't know. Like I've never been on like as high on Stephon Tuitt as other people have, but I'm not saying he's a bad player or bust. It just I don't know if he ever really like rose to the level like people would hype him up to be, but I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Well, to your point about the offense, at this point, Ben Roethlisberger's still there, and they've rebuilt around him with, like you said, some really talented receivers, running back, and the offensive line. They've really rebuilt the offensive line, probably the best offensive line they've had since way back at the start of the Colbert era, and that leads these next 4 years, 14 through 17, are the best 4 years of this era. The Steelers win the division several times. They win a handful of playoff games. They make it to the AFC Championship game. And a lot of that is driven by their offense. Their defense, again, had Shazier worked out, I think that might have been the reason that era was short-lived, because the defense didn't really hold up. And then when some of those talented offensive players like Bell and Brown and Bryant started, for lack of a better word, flaking out, then that kind of fell apart as well.
Yeah, it just seems like they started to like maybe the character like caught up. Like they kind of started picking talent over character. They kind of like I think they got away with it with Antonio Brown for a while, and they thought, okay, we can pick a guy like this and we'll be okay. And no, you can't.
That's right. Lesson learned.
I mean, although I will say this, I mean, are you really going to, like, they got a lot of years out of Brown before he just went totally nuts. I mean, or just, I mean, did he just keep it under wraps all those years just till he got enough money to where he's like, okay, I'm going to just go back to being myself. I got enough money. Now I can do what I want. So, and what's his name? Le'Veon Bell. How much money did he cost himself in that stupid holdout? I mean, if he just would have signed the offer the Steelers were giving him, he would have been making more money than he is now, boxing or whatever.
Yeah, that was not a good decision by him. I didn't think it was a good decision at the time for the Steelers to make him that offer, because running backs, they don't last all that long in terms of their time where they're really useful. So it kind of worked out I think, better for the Steelers that he didn't sign. 2015, so for the third year in a row, we mentioned that they were trying to rebuild the linebacking core. They select a linebacker. It's Bud Dupree, an outside linebacker out of Kentucky, who I think has one really great season. That's his contract year of 2020. Other than that, I think certainly wouldn't call him a bust, but I don't think he lived up to the potential of a first round pick. And then in the second round, probably the worst pick of Colbert's career. And Alonzo Jackson's right up there too. But in the second round in 2015, they select Sanquez Golson, who's a defensive back. So we talked earlier, we said, it was funny in the early 2000s, they were trying to rebuild the DBs because they kept getting burned on the pass. Well, this era of the NFL is very much favorable to passing offense. And in 2015, they're trying to redo the same thing. And one of the guys they pick is Sanquez Golson. He's a cornerback out of Mississippi. He never plays in one NFL game, not even in preseason. You literally cannot find an image on the internet or anywhere of Sanquez Golson in a Steeler uniform because it doesn't exist.
What? How does that work? Wow. He never even, like, how done, they didn't even play him in a
He
preseason
was
game?
hurt. He was always hurt.
Oh my gosh.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, he literally never suits up in a Steeler uniform, never plays in an NFL game. And he was on the roster. It wasn't like they drafted him and he like had some kind of horrific accident, that first
Yeah.
year. And I mean, it was one thing after another after another. He's on the roster for like 3 years, but never plays in
He
a game.
collected all that rookie contract money and didn't have to earn a dime of it. Nice.
Third round is Sammy Coates, a wide receiver who I don't know, again, semi-serviceable, but doesn't really do much. And then in the later rounds, nobody really of note. But in the fifth round, Jesse James out of Penn State, who caught that pass. Darn it, he caught that pass.
Anthony Chickalo. There was Anthony Chickalo, who was mediocre on a good day.
So yeah, these drafts starting to fade a little bit. 2016, this year again. So
Ouch.
they've drafted all these linebackers, so they've got the linebackers now, and with having selected Golson the year before, now let's go back to the defensive backfield. So you see a lot of defensive picks in this era because, like we talked about, like Steve said, they had this very talented offense, talented skill guys, good offensive line. And what they were missing was defense. So if they could just get the right picks on defense, they could make another Super Bowl run, but they don't do it. The first round pick this year is Artie Burns, cornerback from Miami. He is a ginormous bust. The second round pick is Sean Davis, who I wouldn't call him quite as big a bust as Burns, especially since he was a second round pick, but he never really lives up to that second round pedigree. Third round's a decent pick. It's defensive tackle Javon Hargrave, who was pretty decent. Actually, ends up making a Pro Bowl for Philadelphia later on. So that wasn't a bad pick. But in terms of what they were trying to do, which was to have this really solid linebacking unit and have a really good defensive group of defensive backs behind them, that has failed miserably. They've spent three top two picks in the last two seasons on defensive backs, and all three are busts.
It's the exact opposite of the beginning of his. Yeah.
Yes.
Where all three worked out. None of these have worked out.
Oh yeah, that's a good call. You were pointing out before how they got all three of those guys and they were starters on the Super Bowl team. And Steve, it's a what might have been, right? Because 2016 they're in the AFC Championship game. 2017 they have that 13-3 record. And these are years that in the early 2000s or in the mid 2000s, those were Super Bowl years, and they weren't these years. And you just wonder if they would have gotten three picks on the level, even if two of those picks, right? Not even all three. If they would have gotten two of those picks,
just at least they were good, not horrible. Yeah,
right. Because like you said, like Chris Hope wasn't a Hall of Famer, but he was very good, and he helped solidify a secondary that was just rancid before he got there. And then Troy and Ike obviously were pretty big stars, but even if two of these guys, Burns, Davis, and Golson, even if two of them work out, you just wonder if the Steelers get over that hurdle that they couldn't get over, losing playoff games to teams that were, teams like New England and Jacksonville.
Yeah, that game against Bell was hurt too. That he wouldn't play that game against like the Patriots, and that goes back. Why did they offer him all that money? Like I would have been done with him after he sat out that game against New England. I mean that kind of soured me on him. It's like you're not even going to try and play. It's like, I mean, I'm not inside his body, but oh well.
Yeah, I agree. I think even if he plays, they don't beat Tom Brady with the defense that they had. But again, I agree. I didn't know why they wanted to re-sign him either, and I'm glad he turned us down.
Well, even if he was legitimately hurt, then what's the point? Like, okay, he's legitimately hurt, which maybe he was. Then you're investing in something that's on the decline. Yeah.
Yeah, Bell had missed the 2014 playoffs and the 2015 playoffs with injuries, and then he missed that championship game with an injury. So, when push came to shove, he was not available, and that hurt as well. 2017, the Steelers say, you know what? We've had enough defensive backs. Let's go back to linebacker. And this time they do pretty good. They draft a guy named TJ Watt, who later becomes the NFL's Defensive Player of the Year in 2021. So that's a great pick. That really, again, you can kind of look a few seasons beyond, right? Because 2019, 2020, the Steelers really start to certainly don't have a defense the caliber of what they did in the 2000s, but it's not the ginormous embarrassment that it was, in the early part of this decade or in the middle part of this decade. And, and TJ Watt was part of that. Second round, Juju Smith-Schuster, wide receiver from USC. Good receiver, definitely a good receiver. Did some really good things here. Was a little frustrating at times with some of his antics and things like that, but a good pick. And then in the third round, they go back to the defensive backfield, and this is a decent pick. Cam Sutton, who's currently a starter for them, not a star, but again, a guy on that level of, if you could have gotten a guy like that a few years earlier, when the team was really competitive and in the playoffs every year and making it to AFC Championship games, you could have gotten more of those kinds of guys with things that turned out different. And then they also have a second pick in the third round, and they take Pitt running back James Conner, who we were all thrilled about at the time because we loved James Conner, and he was pretty productive in his time here, but that was limited by injuries a lot. So pretty good 2017 draft.
Yeah, that's like back to the good old days for and I never understood like people when Connor was leaving. Oh, he's not a pro running back. He's not this. He's not that. He had some injuries, but he had a totally bounce back year with the Cardinals this year. Mm-hmm. So, you just can't run a running like what do they play? 17 games now. Nobody's gonna be able to handle that kind of workload anymore. And okay, yeah, if he's not that good, last time I saw him last season, he was running over Aaron Donald for a touchdown. So. Go figure. I guess he wasn't good enough. That wasn't good enough for the Steelers. Whoever they have in the backfield right now. I don't know. I mean, the new guy probably be okay. But
well, Najee Harris. I think that was what made Connor expendable.
He ain't run over Aaron Donald, that's for sure.
Yeah, again, running backs. It's hard.
I'm totally biased because this is one of my favorite Pitt players, and he was the exact opposite of Le'Veon Bell.
Right.
I mean, he's a lot of heart, and even when you try and play injured, and I don't know.
No, I'm with you. I love James Conner. I still love James Conner. I'll root for him till the day he retires.
But people would bash him when he was like, "Oh, he isn't a pro. He's not that good." I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. So, whatever.
So 2018, the year after that. The first round pick is Terrell Edmunds, who is a safety. So again, they're trying really hard on the whole defensive backfield thing. And Edmunds, it's so hard with Edmunds because everybody kind of says the exact same thing about Terrell Edmunds. He becomes a starter. He's a starter for several years. They re-signed him again this year to start, and everybody says the same thing, which is if Terrell Edmunds was a third round pick, we'd all say, oh, good pick. Guy came in, he started, serviceable, pretty decent safety. But because he was a first round pick, he's an underachiever at that point. So that's Terrell Edmunds. Second round is James Washington, wide receiver, another guy that was an underachiever, did not really live up to any of that potential. Third round is Mason Rudolph, who was drafted as a successor to Ben, and at least thus far has not quite fulfilled that promise. His story is not completely written yet, of course. And then they also have a second pick in the third round, and they take Chuck Okafor, who ends up being a decent tackle as a starter and was recently awarded a pretty big contract extension by the Steelers. So, okay draft here, I guess, Steve. I don't know. This one's a little hard to rate.
I think this is the draft class that Ben Roethlisberger screwed over, quite honestly. I think Washington and Rudolph, Ben stuck it to them. And I think I don't know about Rudolph. Rudolph's going to have to go somewhere else. Washington went to Dallas, didn't he, in the offseason, I do believe.
I believe so.
It would not surprise me if he makes a Pro Bowl with them this year. Not at all. Not even a little bit. Because I think Ben had a real stick up somewhere about Rudolph, and because Rudolph's good buddies with James Washington, so that kind of James Washington never got a chance here. Never, and every time he was on the field, he made a play. So I don't know what else more he could have done to prove to the coaching staff that he deserved to be here. So there was something else at play there, and I don't know anything more than any other person that doesn't have access to the team Rudolph probably isn't going to be a full-time. He's probably going to be like another Landry Jones. Like, he's going to be a decent backup. And, if you need a guy like a Charlie Batch and that kind of quarterback, I get the feeling that's where he's going to settle in. And if he can go somewhere else, I think he just needs a new start with a new team and a new environment, new city and all that, and he'll be fine. But
yeah, I disagree about Washington, but I've heard other people make that same argument as you, Steve. And I think it's a fair argument, at least. And like you said, he certainly now has the chance to prove you and those other folks right, and he very, very, very well may. I just thought if he was that good, he was on the team for
4 years. Yeah. But they never threw, it seemed like when he was open, he caught the ball. He made tough catches. And maybe he wasn't getting open enough. I don't know. I'm not a coach. I'm not a scout, but
it was odd how he seemed to, his playing time seemed to decrease over time. And you're right. It
wasn't really like he fumbled or dropped a lot of passes, or it just seemed like Ben would not throw him the ball, because he did well that year. Duck Hodges was the quarterback. That was his best season. So and that's saying something. You got that.
Yeah.
I just honestly think it was a Ben thing with it. I really do. And I would not say, like I said, I would not be surprised at all. I think I think he has a good season. Maybe a Pro Bowl season, but I bet he catches at least 60 passes this year. I don't know who the Cowboys, it's not even knowing who the Cowboys' other wide receivers are, but.
All right. Well, time will tell on that one for sure.
I could be wrong, and whatever. Then I guess I get fired from my not scouting for any team in the NFL ever.
So these last 4 drafts of Colbert's career, I'm just going to kind of mush them together, because I feel like at this point, it's too early to really make any kind of hard line determination, although folks might disagree on some of these picks. So 2018, they trade up for a linebacker, Devin Bush from Michigan. Again, story not completely written yet. Seemed like he was going to be really good. Has really flamed out the last few years. Really, really looked bad last year, but was coming off a serious injury. So that one's hard to gauge. The second round or the third round pick that year, no second round pick, because they traded up to get Bush. Third round pick is Deontay Johnson, the wide receiver, who again looks brilliant at times and then at times drops passes when he's wide open. I think, is he an elite wide receiver? Is he a guy that is good but not great? I think we still have to see there. Third round picks Justin Lane that year. in 2019, so for all these years of trying so hard to draft defensive backs and not really doing a good job. So in 2019, they just say, you know what, we're going to trade away our first round pick for a guy we know is proven. So they trade their first round pick for Minkah Fitzpatrick. They don't have a first round pick. Second round pick, Chase Claypool, another guy like Johnson, looks brilliant at times, celebrates first downs when this team's trying to rush the ball down the field at other times. Third round picks, Alex Highsmith, another guy who, again, story not quite completely written.
I like Highsmith. I think he's going to be a good player. I think he showed enough already that he's probably going to get more playing time. Now, whether he gets exposed or not, we'll see. But
yeah,
I think he looks good so far.
Yes. So that was, I think I said 2019. That was 2020. 2021, Najee Harris, first round, Pat Freiermuth, second round, Kendrick Green and Dan Moore in the third round. All four of those guys started in their rookie years. So that's saying something there. Kendrick Green probably maybe shouldn't have started at center. Najee Harris looked pretty sharp. Freiermuth looks like he has potential again. Way too early to tell. And then, of course, 2022, Kenny Pickett from Pitt is the first-round pick. George Pickens, the receiver, is the second-round pick. And DeMarvin Leal, the defensive lineman, is the third-round pick. And obviously, none of those guys have played an NFL game as of this recording. So, like I said, just kind of combining all those years together. Steve, any thoughts on those guys?
I think Kendrick Green has the most potential to be a total bust. Devin Bush is up there just because you shouldn't get that bad just from a knee injury. So maybe kind of rights the ship and finds himself. But it's literally he's the career before the knee injury and then the career after the knee injury. So I don't know. I thought he just tore his ACL. Maybe he did something else, or maybe that messed with his head because he just looks absolutely horrible. And he looks like he doesn't want to play at times. He'll just run away from contact and stuff. And it's bad. It's been bad. He's had a really bad season.
I think Claypool has the potential to be a bust too. He had that really stellar rookie year, caught a lot of touchdowns, and then he really did not follow that up.
Well, I think it's going from the you're just the third guy and you're getting really easy, you can just get by on talent, to now you're the guy and you get the team's other best corners, and now you have to be really disciplined. And he definitely looks like he has the talent. I don't know. I mean, we'll see.
Some other guys in there that, so some guys have potential to be bust, some guys have potential to be stars. I think Harris definitely is at the top of that list. Freiermuth.
Yeah, I think Freiermuth's going to be good. I think we can safely say that.
And Deontay Johnson, I mean, who knows at this point?
He might be Jeff Graham. He just drops everything.
Yeah. I mean, right. So it's again, time will tell. So yeah, that's the list. We just wanted to go through. I think it's just interesting to go through those drafts, kind of see the through line of recent Steeler history there, right? Of how Super Bowl teams got built, of how they then got bad for a while, but then it wasn't quite, it wasn't the 1980s, right? They had some bad drafts. They were bad. They weren't even that bad. They were just mediocre for a while. And then, using the draft, they rebuilt enough to be competitive again, but then not as competitive as they had been before that. So a lot of that, again, in football, I know you have free agency, you have trades, but so much in pro football still ties back to the draft. And, Colbert's legacy overall, I think, is still pretty solid. Obviously, built some great teams and had some great picks. Steve, any parting thoughts?
For whatever reason, there's teams in the last half after the Paul Malls and all them were retired or left. They just, whatever, there was just whatever I can't put my finger on it, but whatever the it factor was, they didn't have. For some reason, Brown and Bell and Bryant, it just seemed Like even that even seemed to drift into Juju and like Claypool. Like whenever you needed to make a play, they just like they would drop a pass or I don't know. It just or they'd fumble. Like didn't Juju fumble like way another game? It just seems like whenever the chips were down, those teams earlier in the decade would find a way to win, whereas these teams would just not necessarily find a way to lose, but they just couldn't get over the top for whatever reason.
Yeah, they weren't. They weren't championship teams. Championship teams.
They were close, but it just like they just couldn't. You never got that. It wasn't like that 15 in 1 year, or even where you thought, oh, this team is really. Even that year they went undefeated, like the first half of the season. You kind of had the feeling, well, they're going to come back to earth because like the last couple wins they got kind of lucky. So
when the Steelers played the Rams in the '79 Super Bowl, that '79 team that won the fourth Super Bowl. By all accounts, was probably the worst of those four Super Bowl winning teams. But they still won the Super Bowl that year, and they were down in the fourth quarter to a pretty mediocre Rams team. The Rams were like 9-7 that year. And there's a quote by John Facenda in the highlights where he goes, "Great teams aren't always great; they're just great when they have to be." And that really epitomized the Steelers of that early Colbert era. Like you said, they were great when they had to be. They were great in big games, clutch moments, and those Steelers of the following decade of the 2010s, to your point, in those clutch moments, they really weren't. They didn't have it. So that's a really good observation. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that. Please subscribe to the podcast. Please check us out on social media or at our website. All those links are in the show description. Please let other folks know about the podcast. Word of mouth is always our best form of advertising. Also, if you feel led to leave a rating on whatever podcast service you subscribe to, that's another way to help people find us. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.